Good afternoon. Very, very happy to speak with all of you today. And I'm going to be talking about the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, or IPEF, and the issue of whether it should include Taiwan. So when President Biden, along with some other countries, launched the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, or IPEF, it also raised an issue of whether or not Taiwan should be included. And Taiwan was very disappointed at the initial exclusion. Now, judging by objective criteria, I would say that it makes sense to include this democratic, economic, and technological player in the world. So as with all things, I start with the view of Congress. 200 members in the House, along with 52 senators, wrote letters to the Commerce Secretary, the USTR, and the President to urge inclusion of Taiwan in IPEF. But on May 23rd in Tokyo, Biden announced that the 13 initial countries were launching IPEF, and they did not include Taiwan. The Wall Street Journal called it a mistake. On May 26th, Fiji joined as the 14th initial founding member. Now, especially after China instigated the crisis in the Taiwan Strait earlier this month, I would have to say that it's even more imperative for IPEF to include Taiwan. Because in broader strategic terms, despite long-time congressional calls to enhance the bilateral engagement with Taiwan, the spotty economic engagement has not caught up with the very robust defense cooperation that we have with Taiwan. And we have strong interest in not only Taiwan's economic, but also geostrategic value. And Taiwan needs economic strength plus diversification to avoid vulnerability from over-dependence on China. So now I'm going to shift to talk about what is IPEF. IPEF is a new model of multilateral economic cooperation to deal with some topics: innovation in clean energy, the digital economy, technological transformation, rules of the world for fair competition, and high standards of commitments. It focuses on trade, which is under the U.S. Trade Representative, or USTR, plus 3 other subjects that come under the Department of Commerce. And they are supply chains, clean energy and infrastructure, as well as anti-corruption. So in short, IPEF focuses on 4 aspects of a connected, resilient, clean, and fair economy. Now, what is it not? IPEF is not a trade agreement. It's not any agreement at all. In fact, it just starts talks for future negotiations. It is also not containment of China. It does represent an alternative positive option versus China's. Now, I would note that when President Obama announced the negotiation of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, back in 2009 with 11 countries, TPP also did not include China. So now, what is the broader context? First, we have to start with the problem that China is provoking rising tensions in the Taiwan Strait by using all the DIME or dime power tools. Diplomatic squeeze of Taiwan, informational distortions, military threat, and economic coercion. Now, IPEF also entails three significances. First, the significance of U.S. economic re-engagement in the Indo-Pacific after withdrawing from TPP back in 2017. So in other words, IPEF is a long overdue message of U.S. economic leadership and engagement for a rules-based order in a free and open Indo-Pacific. Second, the significance of the Indo-Pacific strategy itself. IPEF really is the economic pillar of President Biden's Indo-Pacific strategy. But to me, there's more. IPEF further confirms that the past and failed China-centric approach to the Indo-Pacific really ended with President Obama. The Indo-Pacific is really important. The region has more than half of the world's population, 60% of the world's GDP, 2/3 of the world's economic growth, and 65% of the world's oceans. Now, today, Taiwan is included as its own part of our Indo-Pacific strategy, but it wasn't always this way. Since the Obama administration announced in 2011 a U.S. strategic rebalance toward the Asia-Pacific, one issue has concerned whether we consider Taiwan narrowly in the Taiwan Strait or consider Taiwan more broadly in the Western Pacific. At that time, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton did not even mention Taiwan in writing an article on the unfortunately worded pivot to the Pacific. But right at the East-West Center, the next month, she corrected the policy in a speech on the same subject of America's Pacific century. She added that the U.S. has a strong relationship with Taiwan as an important security and economic partner. Now, we might think, well, of course, but to tell you, back then, it was a breakthrough in the U.S. approach to the Indo-Pacific. Third significance is the significance of Taiwan. In 2021, Taiwan was the 8th largest trading partner of the United States in goods. Taiwan was the U.S.'s 7th biggest agricultural market. And Taiwan produces 92% of the world's advanced semiconductors that are critical for technology. Please show slide 1. What are the top markets for Taiwan's exports? Taiwan's top export markets are China at about 22%, according to this slide. Then the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, United States, Hong Kong, Japan, the European Union, and South Korea. Note, however, that the data about Taiwan's exports to China can be misleading. Actually, a significant amount of Taiwan's products that Taiwanese firms design and sell are actually made elsewhere, especially in China, and then shipped globally, including to the United States. As my former colleague at CRS, Wayne Morrison, pointed out in our joint report. You can remove the slide. Another part of the context are Taiwan's multilateral and bilateral engagements. Taiwan already has membership in multilateral groups and bilateral economic talks. First, Taiwan belongs to multilateral organizations. Do you know what they are? First, the Asia Development Bank, or ADB, since its founding in 1966 under the name of Taipei, China. Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC, since its founding in 1991 as Chinese Taipei. The Central American Bank for Economic Integration since 1992 as the Republic of China and parentheses Taiwan. And, of course, the World Trade Organization, or WTO, since 2002 as the customs territory of Taiwan, Penghu, Jinmen, and Matsu. Secondly, Taiwan has signed bilateral agreements with countries other than the United States. In fact, Taiwan even has the Economic Cooperation Framework Agreement, or ECFA, with China. And third, I'm going to focus on Taiwan's bilateral economic engagement with the United States. Today, do you know how many channels for bilateral economic engagement we have? We have 6 channels. First, cabinet rank visits. The post-1979 US-Taiwan exchanges between even cabinet rank officials have focused on economic or functional areas. In 1992, visits by cabinet rank officials started regularly, but then became sporadic after 2000. So one issue is whether we should make them more regular and routine, so that when they do happen, such as Speaker Pelosi's CODEL, China doesn't blow them out of proportion. Another channel, secondly, is the Trade and Investment Framework Agreement, or TIFA. A lot of the press write articles as if this is something we're still negotiating, but actually it's already been signed and it's been in place since 1994. The USTR has held these TIFA talks to resolve trade disputes, but then suspended talks periodically over a dispute we have because Taiwan put some unscientific restrictions on US beef and pork over the additive called ractopamine. And please show slide 2. A third economic channel we have is the Select USA Forum. That has to do with foreign direct investment, or FDI. Taiwan has sent delegations to Select USA since 2013. In 2020, Taiwan was the 9th fastest growing source of FDI. And in 2021, US FDI in Taiwan totaled $16.8 billion, whereas Taiwan's FDI inbound to the United States totaled $17.3 billion. But it's relatively low. As my chart shows, FDI from Australia, about $97.7 billion. China, about $38 billion. Japan is off the chart at $690 billion, it's not even in my slide. Singapore, about $30 billion. South Korea at $72.5 billion. Taiwan at only $17.3 billion. So there's a lot of potential. And US FDI in the region, including in Taiwan, comes at, the FDI in Taiwan totals $16.8 billion. But to put it in perspective, the US FDI in Taiwan is only equal to about that in Thailand, at about $15.5 billion. So you can remove the slide. Fourth channel is called the Economic Prosperity Partnership Dialogue, or EPPD. Now, when the USTR suspended TIFA talks, the State Department decided to step up in the previous administration and initiated with Taiwan the Economic Prosperity Partnership Dialogue in November 2020. The two sides met again in November 2021. 5. Technology Trade and Investment Cooperation, or TTIC framework. Secretary of Commerce Raimondo and Taiwan's Minister of Economic Affairs announced the TTIC in December of 2021 to focus on semiconductors and supply chains. Now notice that this effort was announced at the cabinet rank level. And 6, the U.S.-Taiwan Initiative on 21st Century Trade. The USTR launched this initiative on June 1st, 2022, just days after the launch of IPEF that did not include Taiwan. Now, I don't think that is a coincidence. This initiative seeks to negotiate agreements in specific areas of trade that are high standard and economically meaningful. Now, there's some similarity between the initiative and IPEF. There's a lot of overlap in the subjects. There's also similarity that they're both not trade agreements. And there's similarity in that there's no need for Congress to pass legislation. Now, there are also some differences. The initiative is bilateral, so it should be simpler and speedier to reach outcomes than the multilateral IPEF. There's another difference that USTR leads the TIFA talks, but both the USTR and the Department of Commerce lead IPEF. There are also different approaches. On the US side, the Deputy USTR is involved, but on Taiwan side, it was a little different. It was the ministers of without portfolio, John Deng, plus Foreign Affairs, Joseph Wu, who announced this initiative on Taiwan side. A key difference then is that there's faster progress in the initiative, faster than if Taiwan were in IPEF. On June 27th, the Deputy USTR, Bianchi, and Minister Deng already held their first meeting. And just last week, on August 17th, they announced agreement on the negotiating mandate. And they might have talks in September. And again, I don't think it's a coincidence that on September 8th and 9th, IPEF will be holding its first ministerial meeting in Los Angeles. So the bottom line, in short, is that under this bilateral initiative, the formal negotiations have already started, whereas IPEF only talks about future negotiations among the members. In addition to these 6 channels, the two sides could also be negotiating an agreement on double taxation. The problem is that even if a foreign firm sells and ships goods that are from a Taiwanese manufacturer directly to the firm's foreign customers, Taiwan taxes such foreign sales. So Taiwan is harming its own competitiveness relative to countries like South Korea. So now I'm going to shift to why IPEF is not including Taiwan and why IPEF might want to include Taiwan. So the Biden administration tried to maximize the initial members of IPEF, partly by not including Taiwan at the start. It would have been a deal breaker for some countries in the launch of IPEF. Secondly, Taiwan's name as a member of IPEF would have been controversial. Remember, I mentioned all the different names that Taiwan uses for its membership in different multilateral organizations. And during the launch, Could that have included Taiwan's flag as the Republic of China or the president with other national leaders? These would have been sensitive subjects. Nonetheless, Taiwan is a missing piece. Also, Taiwan could help itself, if it were in IPEF, to expand its economic engagement, perhaps for even more trade agreements. Now, the US talks about using all of our power tools in a whole of government approach to strengthen Taiwan. So it does make sense, and I'll just tick off some reasons. First, integrated deterrence across all domains, all instruments of national power, and with all our allies and partners. Security, boosting economic security to catch up with boosting Taiwan's self-defense. Leadership, US leadership is required to enhance the inclusion of Taiwan in the world. Resilience. Everyone is talking about boosting resilience, and this is important for the United States to help our partners to withstand coercion and avoid over-dependence. Technology. Taiwan is important as a reliable and secure partner for sensitive technology. Legitimacy. China's political warfare tries to delegitimize Taiwan's government. And Pacific identity. Actually, Taiwan also is a Pacific power in its own right. In short, IPEF helps to break out of the past Sino-centric approach to US strategy that is unrealistic and unsustainable, especially for our policy on Taiwan. Now, given the East-West Center's priority on Pacific Island countries, I want to give a shout out to some and note that Taiwan has, under the formal name of Republic of China, has diplomatic ties with 4 Pacific Island countries. They are Marshall Islands, Nauru, Palau, and Tuvalu. So what are the outcome and options for Taiwan? As I've shown, the US is not ignoring Taiwan. We now have 6 bilateral economic engagements, plus a potential agreement to avoid double taxation. Last year, I wrote about optimism among US companies operating in Taiwan. But this year, they are frustrated. What can Taiwan do urgently? First, focus on specific agreements under the new US-Taiwan initiative. Taiwan has an advantage, maybe even a secret weapon. President Tsai is a former trade negotiator who got Taiwan into the WTO in 2002. She could lead and coordinate Taiwan's government for urgent outcomes. Second, provide data about the gains of bilateral trade agreements with the United States, but also other countries. For the United States, it would be really important to provide the data state by state. A study by the Heritage Foundation found that there would be positive economic effects for both countries. Third, take action with unilateral options, including recommendations from the American Chamber of Commerce, or AmCham, in Taipei. Taiwan should ensure energy supply and stability. Taiwan has a defense think tank, INDSR, and it surveyed Taiwanese people who saw 3 top threats to their security: China, low birth rates, and energy shortages. AmCham surveyed its members, and 78% of them have moderate to high concerns about insufficient power. Taiwan should also increase competitiveness by eliminating the double taxation on chips and other goods. Increase investments outbound to the United States and other countries. Invest in infrastructure around the world, possibly with a sovereign wealth fund. Invest in what is called the new blue economy. Have you heard of that? Especially with Pacific Island countries, in order to have the sustainable use of ocean resources. Improve labor conditions, especially for fishermen, avoiding forced labor. Accelerate the shift to conduct business digitally instead of manually or on paper. Strengthen supply chains to ensure that they're safe, secure, and reliable, especially when Taiwan is responsible for so much of the world's semiconductors. And the last thing I would highlight for Taiwan's options is to boost a fully bilingual capacity, especially in using English. So in closing, I again want to mention the congressional view. As the senators wrote to Biden, the more economic engagement the US and our allies and partners have with Taiwan, the stronger our collective resilience against coercion. Russia's invasion of Ukraine shows the value of tangible economic support by the United States and like-minded allies and partners, and the same is true for Taiwan. In other words, it is in both the economic and geostrategic interests of the United States and our partners to include Taiwan in IPEF. It makes sense that Taiwan's entry would advance the shared strategic goal in a free and open Indo-Pacific that is more inclusive, connected, prosperous, secure, and resilient. Now, with Russia's brutal war in Ukraine and China's instigated crisis in the Taiwan Strait just earlier this month, the US and global allies are looking more at Taiwan. Taiwan is receiving more support and sympathy. But ultimately, Taiwan must take actions urgently, including the options that I highlighted. Taiwan's government and companies have a number of unilateral options to take, facing China's existential threat. Taiwan can be proactive and not just waiting for others. So I'll stop here, and I'll look forward to exchanging with everyone in questions and answers. I look forward to your comments as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shirley. So now we'll open it up for Q&A. So just a reminder to our online audience, you can enter your questions through the Q&A feature. And I'll let the in-person audience have the first question. Does anyone here have a question? All right, fantastic.
Hi, my name is Jose Zhou. I'm from TACO in Honolulu. And we learned that the IPEF is an important economic pillar of the overall U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy. So, and we don't have doubt, we don't have doubt that Taiwan is qualified to be included in an IPEF. But I think the difficulty comes from the sensitivity, especially we are talking about the inclusion of Taiwan in a multilateral mechanism. But I think that this sensitivity does not come from the U.S. They come from the regional countries, so they may not want to be forced to pick sides. peak size between China and the US. So my first question is, how do you see that this concern can be of the regional countries can be eliminated? So do you think what is Taiwan's inclusion in the IPEF is possible if China is excluded? I'm talking about other countries' concerns. Thank you.
So first of all, I do not phrase the issue as whether countries are forced to choose between the United States and China. That is not the case. Okay? Countries already have made their own decisions. They've already made up their minds based on their own interests. And they're aligned with democracy, with freedom, with a rule-based order. They've already made up their minds. They know where they should be strategically aligned. Nobody is being, the question is not between the United States and China. It's between a rules-based order for free and open Indo-Pacific or a different kind of order where there is no freedom, there is no sovereignty, there is no territorial integrity, there's no human rights, and on and on. Secondly, I would just point out that Taiwan is already a member in a number of multilateral organizations, right? And I ticked them off earlier. The Asian Development Bank, World Trade Organization, after all, including the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC for short. And I want to note the United States will get to host APEC next year. So it's going to come back around for the United States to host, and I think it's a very exciting time. And the third thing I would say is that what we don't know is how much preparation went into trying to talk with other countries about the benefits of including Taiwan. Now, after all, the work has been done before. And your president in Taiwan herself got Taiwan into the WTO. So you could not have written a better movie script where someone who was the trade negotiator way back in the early 2000s is now the president of Taiwan. And the same with us. We could not have written a better movie script where someone who was a senator, Senator Biden, who was there in the Senate when the Congress drafted and passed the Taiwan Relations Act back in 1979, is now the president. So he is well equipped, very authoritative, and should be able to articulate the interests and policies for why we have this important economic and security relationship and partnership, no less, with Taiwan. So more work can be done, and the statement of IPEF definitely said that it is inclusive. So if it is inclusive and open, there is the potential. It just means that some more work needs to be done by all sides, including by Taiwan, to talk to the different countries, and that's where diplomacy comes in. I would argue diplomacy among all the major players.
We're actually going to take one question from our online audience first, but then we'll have you next, Karen. So from online, what about including Taiwan in the Quad? What are your thoughts on this?
Interesting. So the Quad, of course, means the quadrilateral grouping, which is the United States, Japan, India, Australia. And there's a lot of talk starting a few years ago about whether Taiwan might want to be included in that. There is not that much discussion, actually, about Taiwan being part of the Quad. And there's more of discussion about Taiwan and IPEF. There's more discussion about what we can do to get a more sensitive, or not sensitive, but there's a more sensitive issue of getting arms sales to Taiwan more expeditiously. Those are the other kinds of topics that are discussed. And again, Taiwan doesn't actually have to limit itself to only 4 countries in the Quad. Taiwan can definitely expand its diplomacy and its economic engagements with many, many, many countries. And it's not even limited to the Indo-Pacific. Actually, Taiwan is a global player, as I said earlier, and I want to highlight that. Although we are talking about, how things are going on in this region or that region, actually, Taiwan is a global player, and there are global interests when it comes to Taiwan, economically, diplomatically, as well as militarily. So I would say Taiwan doesn't need to limit itself to the Quad or even to just the Indo-Pacific region, and it should not.
Thank you very much, Shirley.
Thank you very much. So the last time APEC was held in the United States, it was here in Hawaii. And we were all very careful to refer to Taiwan as an economy because that's how they refer to them rather than nations belonging to APEC. So a two-part question. Are the countries or nations or members of IPEF economies, or are they referred to as nations? Is that one of the reasons Taiwan is not a member? And as Jose said, could it be the other member countries? Is Taiwan working closely with other member countries to try to get them to change their mind and not just the U.S.?
Right. So it would. So I had highlighted, and I agree that there would be sensitive questions about what is the name. So I mentioned about how Taiwan's a member of different organizations under various different names, right? And during the launch, there were heads of state involved with their national flags behind them, so it would have been difficult and more sensitive. But I think in the future, going forward, if the group really is to be inclusive and to include such a major player in the world, then things like that can be worked out. They can be worked out with different names, perhaps different formulations. It's been done before. We've done it, so why can't we do it again? Okay, Taiwan's already a full member of APEC. Now, it would also take some flexibility on the part of Taiwan as well. But I think that a lot of countries would be willing to have talks, at least do the preparation, as was done in years past. Now, for the United States itself, speaking for us, calling Taiwan a country is not a problem, because that is how Congress crafted the Taiwan Relations Act. For the purposes of our domestic laws and domestic purposes, Taiwan continues to be considered a country, but we no longer have the diplomatic relationship. And you notice that I often use the word officials, because that's exactly what we have. We have not only members of Congress who are U.S. officials, but also officials in the executive branch, as well as military officers who have visited Taiwan. So it is completely a false statement to say that we have an unofficial relationship. In fact, that contravenes the Taiwan Relations Act as crafted by Congress, passed by Congress, and signed by the President into law as the law of the land. Taiwan Relations Act does not stipulate that we have an unofficial relationship. And I think that's a really important point that I want to make, that a lot of people miss.
Thank you. So from our online audience, if you could elaborate, when and under what conditions do you expect the Biden administration to invite Taiwan to join IPEF?
All right, so as far as what the Biden administration would do, I think it would take continued oversight from Congress. Congressional oversight is going to be key. There are members of Congress, and there are committees and subcommittees in Congress right now who are very, very, very focused on what is going on in Taiwan, because it affects our critical interests. So congressional oversight is very important. And I started with Congress, and I ended with Congress. Secondly, Taiwan itself is going to have to do some work, and that's why I urge for leadership and coordination from President Tsai herself. She is well equipped. She's a very capable leader with the background as a trade negotiator. Make the meaningful outcomes in this bilateral initiative on an urgent basis with an ambitious agenda. Make things happen. Instead of having our companies in Taiwan being frustrated, we would think that we could have European companies, American companies, Asian companies, Latin American companies that are thriving and wanting to operate in a place like Taiwan that has so many benefits. And so the potential is there, but it really needs Taiwan to grab this opportunity. And this window of opportunity is not going to last forever.
Thank you. Any more questions from our in-person audience? Okay, I will proceed then with another question from online. Do you agree with so many that China will never actually go to war with another country?
So that statement is a patently false statement, right? China's already gone to war, if not an outright war. I mean, you can take off India, you can take, it's already encroached on a number of territories. It's had armed conflicts with even Vietnam, even though they're both communist powers. And it doesn't even have to come to outright conflict. We are already seeing the coercion in what a lot of people call the gray zone, forcing countries to do things against their will, encroaching on other people's maritime claims and territory, and worse in a place where, since at the East-West Center, the president of the East-West Center, Susie Vares-Lum, just talked about one priority being the environment. And I talked about the blue economy. And the Pacific Island countries are very, very concerned about climate change and rising sea levels. We have China damaging coral reefs and other parts of the maritime environment, building up fake islands in the South China Sea, for example. So there's lots and lots of damage. And again, I do not want to restrict this challenge to only the region or only the Indo-Pacific. It is actually a global challenge. And I will start with one example. Violating sovereignty, violating territorial integrity. And this happens around the world, including in a place that you might not think of, and that was Norway. Back in 2010, when the Nobel Peace Prize Committee awarded a human rights Nobel Prize to a dissident, China tried to punish Norway when Norway had nothing to do with the decision. It was a committee that awarded the prize, and China tried to punish another country for something it had no control over. So that's just an example that I would mention. So that is just not a statement. And if you ask people from all different countries around the region or even outside the region, they would just laugh. You know, if they're Indonesia or Vietnamese or Malaysians or Japanese or Taiwanese or Indians, they would just laugh at that statement because it's just, they know it's patently false, unfortunately.
Thank you. More questions from in person? Okay, I think I'm getting signaled that we might have one more online question. Oh, here it is. Okay, so IPEF or any other bilateral trade talks and mechanisms are critical to Taiwan for sure. However, Taiwan's trade flows with China are increasing, which offer China more leverages. What would you suggest Taiwan do to manage its trade relations with China?
So, first of all, Taiwan's exports to China, as I mentioned, at about 22% of total exports, can be a misleading data point, because what Taiwan's products that are made in China actually can be shipped all over the world, including to the United States, right? That is globalization, basically. And Taiwan is a major player of the global economy. Secondly, Taiwan has already started something, what they call the new southbound policy. So Taiwan is well aware, I think, of avoiding overdependence on China, which then becomes a vulnerability. And so they've already started something called the new southbound policy. And thirdly, Taiwan has been pushing to have bilateral economic ties, as well as bilateral trade agreements with a number of countries, primarily including the United States as well. This has been a long time request coming to Congress, coming to successive administrations for many, many, many years. And again, if Taiwan wants to have more of the engagement, I would urge Taiwan's economic research institutes, for example, the government, for example, other people, to do some of the data, look at the data and do more of the research. Provide the data on what would be the benefits, mutual benefits, of course, not only for Taiwan, but for the other countries, like the United States or other countries. And again, for the United States, the data would be really useful if it is state by state. That's just how it works.
Thank you. I have another question from online. Could you share what are the major benefits of IPEF to the members?
So I would start with the fundamental message. It's not explicit, but it's implicit, and it's very, very important and strategic. This IPEF really is the economic pillar of the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy that the White House announced in February. Before that, you could even argue that there was a vacuum in terms of U.S. economic engagement and leadership in the Indo-Pacific after we withdrew from the TPP in 2017. And so the importance for a lot of countries, and I think why a lot of countries have signed on, is that it re-engages the United States economically in the Indo-Pacific and for U.S. leadership. And it offers a whole other option, an alternative to what China is trying to push. An alternative that is rules-based, talking about clean energy, talking about labor standards, caring about the environment, caring about fairness and openness, and anti-corruption. That is actually rules-based, not based, in other words, rule by law and not rule of law and not rule by law. And this is really important, a vision for the future, a vision of cooperation and not conflict. That everyone can be resilient, can be connected, can be secure, can be prosperous together. That we are stronger if we do this and cooperate together than if we're trying to do things one by one. And so there are some very, very fundamental messages coming out of IPEF. And I think that's why so many countries have signed on, because they also recognize the value of U.S. re-engagement economically in a free and open Indo-Pacific.
We'll get you the microphone for our online audience to be able to hear you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mahalo. As a newbie to all of this, I'm wondering about the world's perception of the U.S. given the pieces, the history that has been colonizing, has been. How can we help indigenous people, Pacific Islanders, other countries where the U.S. has not been seen in the best of light, help to, again, to unify, to see we're working towards cooperation, towards, I'm not sure if I'm being clear with my question, and I apologize. Because what I've heard so far sounds really, really awesome. We're looking at cooperation, working together, food for all. Yeah, that we're taking care of the environment. So, any tips on how to help change perceptions of the U.S. government?
Well, so I don't think anyone would say that we are perfect, and I think we would be the first ones to say we're not perfect, but we try. We do try, and we do put out some ideals. You know, the ideals are out there. We strive for them. We're not always perfect, but at the same time, you look at the if you want to talk about indigenous people, especially in the Pacific Island countries, it was really during the previous administration that at the very highest levels in the White House, I happen to know that in the National Security Council itself, they started to focus on Pacific Island countries. And they even started the very first position of having a coordinator in the NSC itself to focus on Pacific Island countries, focus on Oceania. And it got up to very high levels. Cabinet rank officials, the vice president was involved. The president had the first summit at the White House with the presidents of the freely associated states, Micronesia, Marshall Islands, and Palau. So we've definitely been making the shift. People might not have noticed it because, you know, there is often a debate about focusing on Oceania. But at the East-West Center, of course, is now a priority area. So it's not, you know, it's definitely been a shift. Maybe it's too gradual for some people to notice, but I often want to point out that it was during the previous administration at the highest levels of the White House that we have made this high-level shift to focus more on the Pacific Island countries. And if you look at the United States relationship with the Philippines, which was a colony, you'll see that it is definitely a fairly good relationship with lots and lots of security cooperation. And it's even one of the 5 treaty allies of the United States. And so, yes, we have the history, but we have been moving forward, and everyone looks forward, and everyone has been having some very solid, concrete examples of cooperation.
Thank you. So I think we have time just for maybe one more in-person and one more online question. So is anyone in person eager to get their question asked? Okay, I'll start with the online. So last question here from online. Should the U.S. encourage Japan and South Korea to forge closer ties with Taiwan, or is it better to keep the status quo?
So first of all, we have been encouraging Japan and South Korea to have better relationships with each other, but definitely bringing in other countries to look at the challenges in the Taiwan Strait. What I have said is that we have been trying to multilateralize the support for Taiwan. Yes, there's lots and lots that Taiwan needs to do for itself, and I ticked off a number of them, and I haven't even gotten to the military side or the diplomatic side. At the end of the day, it's Taiwan's people's own responsibility. There are a lot of things that the United States has been doing for decades, bilaterally. But we also, under this new administration of President Biden, and this is a new aspect of the Indo-Pacific strategy, is to multilateralize the support for what is going on in Taiwan Strait. And we really don't have to make a hard sell. Other countries are smart, they're savvy, they're strategic. They can see for themselves as far away as Europe. Again, it's not limited to only the Indo-Pacific region. Countries in Europe have seen the situation. Germany, France, the UK, Canada, countries in Latin America, Chile. So of course, countries that are that close to the Taiwan Strait South Korea and Japan are concerned. Now, Japan is the most concerned because Japan sees that a threat to Taiwan is a threat to Japan. And they are really crystallizing this concept, this vision, this realization that a lot more needs to be done. Now, there are lots and lots of implications from this. But if we're looking at multilateralizing support for Taiwan, then IPEF is definitely one of the options, especially in the economic domain.
Thank you so much, Shirley, for today's presentation. I really appreciate your time and expertise. I did want to give you an opportunity to share any last words with you. Do you want to share any last words before we close?
Well, I think there's a lot to talk about, a lot that, maybe other people, I'm sure you have your own ideas, but that's the point. I think I just want to be able to stimulate and provoke some discussion, some of your own thoughts, because there are lots and lots of things that can be done by the Taiwanese people themselves. And that's what we're looking to see. I think at the end of the day, people in the United States, in Europe, other parts of the Indo-Pacific are watching what Taiwan wants to do, especially in the economic arena. And there are lots and lots of things that Taiwan can do by itself, unilaterally, without waiting passively. Be proactive and be creative.
Thank you so much, Shirley. Let's give her a round of applause. Thank you, Ms. Kan.